So we had this great segue now into the section that I've loosely termed GoMRI as a springboard in our agenda. So Dr. Cloyed is a research senior marine scientist 1 at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, where his main research interests are in the trophic interactions and movement ecology. He works alongside Dr. Ruth Carmichael, as we just heard about, and then Dr. Nikaela Flournoy, who was a GoMRI scholar with the ACER Consortium, working with Patty Sebecki's lab at the University of Alabama. During 2020, Nikaela was, I'm going to say this wrong, Mirzayan Science Policy Fellow with the Gulf Research Program in the National Academies of Science, and just completed her postdoc this summer with the Alabama Water Institute at the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa. As a result of COVID-19, Nikaela is currently navigating, as many of us are, the remote learning instruction with her little ones, ages 7 and 3, while she's continuing to seek additional career opportunities. So thank you both for joining me. I have to say, with this lighting and Zoom backgrounds, they're not kind to curly-haired ladies, so you're looking better than I am right now, Nikaela. But thank you guys for joining me today. And I wanted to start off asking you a couple of questions. Maybe first off, tell us a little bit about your work over the past several years. Carl, do you want to start briefly and just give us an overview of what you've been working on?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks for having me. It's great to join and to talk with everyone. So I came to the Dauphin Island Sea Lab to work on the KARMA project, specifically to do stable isotope modeling of the diet. So the goal with that was to determine if any of the health effects associated with the dolphins, particularly in Barataria Bay, was associated with whether they were eating. As Ruth had mentioned earlier, one fate of the oil is into the food web, and so we were wondering whether or not we saw that signature. We did not necessarily see that signature with stable isotope data. That isn't to say that that didn't necessarily occur. But we were able to do some other really fascinating work looking at how the diet varies through time and across space, and associate a lot of that kind of diet with their habitat use.
Nikaela, I know you've done a lot of great work here on the coast working in marsh ecosystems. What's a big takeaway that you want our audience to know about your research?
So thanks again, Missy, for inviting me to speak on the panel today. So during the past 3 years, projects that I've worked on have been with the nitrogen cycling subgroup with the ACER Consortium, which for me gave way to contributing to interdisciplinary biogeochemical studies centered on the spill's impact on the biodiversity and ecosystem services in the salt marshes and nearshore habitats. So my work specifically involved combining bench, field, and computational approaches to profile the microbial communities in coastal areas that were affected by the spill. So my contributions to the projects and any associated publications helped to underscore for me the interconnectedness of habitat resilience when impacted by a disturbance, and why folks should care, especially those whose livelihood is directly connected to ecosystem services supported within these salt marsh habitats.
Thank you so much for that. I know it was very in-depth research, and that was a very succinct overview, but I'm curious about both of you that you've encountered GoMRI and GoMRI funded research at different points in your careers. And I'm just curious about whether or not it was opportunities through GoMRI or specifically individual researchers that influenced your either decision to go to school here in Alabama or to take on research positions here in the state of Alabama. Nikaela, why don't you start?
So for me, after I earned my master's in 2009 in microbiology, I knew that at some point I wanted to complete my PhD. And at the time of the spill and observing its magnitude, I believe I felt what a lot of folks felt, which is this call to action and what can I do to help? And so fast forward to 2011, and after meeting with Dr. Sebecki at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, with her lab at the time, they were conducting studies on microbial populations and oil impacted salt marshes in coastal Alabama. For me, I knew that was the work that I wanted to be a part of and where I needed to be to advance my graduate education.
Carl?
Yes, so I actually moved to Alabama to participate in this research. I had originally seen an advertisement for a postdoc, and it sounded like really fascinating work. I had never done any work in marine systems or estuarine systems. I grew up in Western Colorado and worked on frogs and freshwater aquatic snails before coming here. And I've always kind of been fascinated with ideas, and while I love animals dearly, I haven't necessarily chosen to focus my research on one. It's more like to change what animal I focus on depending on kind of the idea. So I had a skill set that was relevant, primarily using stable isotopes and some of this modeling. And it, like I say, it brought me here. And it's worked out really great. I've had a really great time working with Dr. Carmichael. I've learned a lot, not just, about dolphins and marine biology, but just kind of participating in a lab, a very large research lab, mentoring graduate students, and kind of that whole side of science.
So Nikaela, not to single you out here, but you heard Admiral Gallaudet right in the beginning, and then Ruth speak about it briefly. We are both women in STEM,
Right.
And doing your career throughout Alabama at different institutions. I want to know a little bit about what have your experience been as a woman in STEM working under GoMRI, and how do you think GoMRI has contributed to your success as a woman in STEM?
That's a good question, and I gave that a lot of thought, and that takes a lot of unpacking. Missy, you can have a whole conference related to the inequities and inroads for women in STEM, each aspect of STEM. Okay. I also believe that there is also a lot of work still needs to be done to actively recruit and support underrepresented minorities in STEM fields, but that's a whole nother conversation. But for me personally, my experience, where I've been able to get this far is by having a strong support system and having a really good postdoctoral mentor and knowing what I wanted out of my postdoctoral experience. And the opportunities that I was afforded, being a part of Dr. Specky's lab and being heavily involved with GoMRI supported research allowed me to do a couple of things. It allowed me to expand my experience, of course. It allowed me to gauge in really thoughtful knowledge share, cross-disciplinary knowledge share, and build that cross-discipline network, especially during my time when I was engaged in a fellowship with the Gulf Research Program at the National Academies. But for me, most important, it allowed me to get the opportunity to convey the enthusiasm that I have when I was working on those projects to undergrads that were working with the lab, kind of what Carl touched on. And for my enthusiasm to rub off on them and impact their career trajectories in their postgraduate pursuits. But I'm glad that I had a postdoctoral advisor who allowed me to spread my wings and also think outside the box, outside of GoMRI, and engage in opportunities involving CGES, the Center for Gender Equity and Science Technology at Arizona State University, and be involved with their Women of Color STEM and Entrepreneurship conferences. Being in that space and getting that exposure as a young woman in STEM, for me was everything. It was a breath of fresh air to be in that space and be around like-minded individuals who not only looked like me, but had shared experiences and had goals that were just as high-reaching and admirable as the ones I had for myself.
Well, I definitely could not have said that better myself, and I thank you for your thoughts on that subject, and I thank you both for joining us today. Unfortunately, we are compressing the program just a little bit, but again, if you guys have any questions for either Carl or Nikaela, please enter them in the Q&A, and I will follow up with them. And I have to say that, you know, I take it as a call to arms as a woman in STEM to continue to be that person that then mentors the next generation of young women in science. And Carl, good luck on your research. Nikaela, good luck on your future endeavors, and take care of those babies, and you're being the strong mother at home as well. And thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me as well.